The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the general store in Virginia City, Nevada, and Garrett Norwood knew before the door even opened that something was terribly wrong with the woman he had been writing to for 6 months. It was late September in 1875, and the desert heat still clung to the afternoon air like a wool blanket. Garrett had been standing on the wooden boardwalk for the better part of an hour, his hat pulled low against the glare of the sun, watching the road for any sign of the stage. He had memorized every word of Fiona Vaughn's letters, written in her careful, flowing script from her home in Boston. She had told him about her life as a seamstress, about the death of her parents, about her desire for a fresh start in the West. He had written back about his ranch, about the cattle he raised, about the mountains that turned purple at sunset. They had shared hopes and dreams and fears across all those miles of paper and ink, and now she was finally here. But when the driver climbed down and opened the door, Garrett's heart dropped into his boots. The woman who half fell into the driver's arms was pale as milk, her skin gleaming with sweat despite the shade inside the coach. Her traveling dress, which must have been a neat gray when she left Boston, was rumpled and stained. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she swayed on her feet like a sapling in a strong wind. "Miss Vaughn?" Garrett stepped forward quickly, his long legs covering the distance in 3 strides. She turned her head toward his voice, and even through the obvious illness, he could see that she was lovely. Her hair, dark as coffee, had escaped its pins and curled damply around her face. Her eyes, when they focused on him, were a startling shade of green. "Mr. Norwood?" Her voice was barely a whisper, and then her knees buckled. Garrett caught her before she hit the ground, sweeping her up into his arms as easily as he would lift a newborn calf. She weighed almost nothing, and he could feel the heat radiating from her body even through the layers of her clothing. Fever. A bad one. "How long has she been like this?" he demanded, looking up at the driver. The older man shook his head, his weathered face creased with worry. "Started feeling poorly somewhere around Salt Lake City, from what the other passengers said. Got worse as we came through the desert. I tried to get her to stay back in Carson City until she was better, but she insisted she had to get here, said someone was waiting for her." "I am waiting for her," Garrett said grimly. "She is my intended bride." The driver's expression softened. "Then you had better get her to a doctor, son. That fever is not something to take lightly." Garrett did not need to be told twice. He adjusted Fiona's weight in his arms, feeling how her head lolled against his shoulder, and started down the boardwalk at a quick pace. Virginia City was a bustling town, grown fat and prosperous on the silver that came out of the Comstock lode, and Dr. Morrison had his office on the next street over. People turned to stare as Garrett passed, but he paid them no mind. All his attention was focused on the woman in his arms and the rapid, shallow sound of her breathing. She murmured something he could not quite catch, and her hand came up to clutch weakly at his shirt. "It is all right," he said quietly, though he was not sure she could hear him. "I have got you. You are safe now." Dr. Morrison was just seeing out another patient when Garrett shouldered through the door. The doctor, a spare man with silver hair and shrewd blue eyes, took one look at Fiona and pointed toward the examination room. "On the table," he said briskly. "What happened?" "She just arrived on the stage from Boston. The driver said she has been sick since Salt Lake City." Garrett laid Fiona down as gently as he could, supporting her head until it rested on the thin pillow. Dr. Morrison was already rolling up his sleeves and washing his hands in the basin. "Boston? That is a long journey, especially at this time of year. Step back now and let me examine her." Garrett retreated to the corner of the room, but he could not make himself leave entirely. He watched as the doctor checked Fiona's pulse, listened to her chest, and felt her forehead. Her eyes fluttered open once, confusion and fear clear in their green depths, but she was too weak to do more than that. "Fever, obviously," Dr. Morrison muttered, more to himself than to Garrett. "Lungs sound congested. When did she last have water?" "I do not know. I can get some." "Do that, and send someone for my nurse, Mrs. Patterson. This young lady is going to need careful tending." Garrett did as he was told, his mind racing. This was not how he had imagined this day at all. He had pictured Fiona stepping off the stage, tired perhaps, but smiling. He had thought they would have a chance to talk, to see if the connection they had found in their letters translated to real life. He had even allowed himself to hope that they might like each other, that the marriage they had agreed to through correspondence might become something more. Now, all of that seemed very far away and unimportant compared to the simple, desperate need to see her well again. Mrs. Patterson arrived within minutes, a capable woman in her 40s who took charge of the sick room with quiet efficiency. Garrett brought water and clean linens when asked, fetched medicines from the doctor's cabinet, and did whatever else was needed. Through it all, Fiona drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes crying out in delirium, sometimes lying so still that Garrett's heart clenched with fear. It was nearly dark when Dr. Morrison finally emerged from the examination room, wiping his hands on a towel. "She has pneumonia," he said without preamble. "Probably caught a cold somewhere along her journey. And the strain of travel and the change in climate turned it into something worse. The next few days will tell us whether she is strong enough to fight it off." "Can she stay here?" Garrett asked. His ranch was 10 miles outside of town, too far to bring a doctor if she took a turn for the worse. "She will have to. Mrs. Patterson will sit with her tonight, and I will check on her regularly. You should go home, get some rest. There is nothing more you can do here." But Garrett shook his head. "She came all this way to marry me. The least I can do is stay with her while she fights for her life." Dr. Morrison studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Suit yourself. There is a chair in the corner. Try not to get in the way." Garrett had no intention of getting in the way. He settled himself in the hard wooden chair and prepared for a long night. Through the hours of darkness, he watched as Mrs. Patterson bathed Fiona's face and hands with cool water, trying to bring down the fever. He listened to her labored breathing and the small sounds of distress she made in her sleep. Twice she woke enough to drink a little water, and once her eyes focused on his face with something like recognition. "You came," she whispered, her voice raw. "Of course I came," Garrett said. "I have been waiting for you. I am sorry. I am not what you expected." "You are exactly what I expected," he told her, and realized as he said it that it was true. The illness could not hide the intelligence in her eyes or the determined set of her jaw. This was the woman who had written to him about wanting to build a new life, who had been brave enough to leave everything she knew and travel across a continent to marry a stranger. She was strong, even if her body was weak right now. Fiona's eyes drifted closed again, but he thought he saw the ghost of a smile on her lips. As dawn broke over the Sierra Nevada, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Garrett made himself a promise. He was going to see this woman well again, no matter what it took. And then, if she still wanted to marry him, he was going to spend the rest of his life making sure she never regretted coming west. The first 3 days were the worst. Fiona's fever spiked so high that she became delirious, calling out names Garrett did not recognize and thrashing weakly against the sheets. Dr. Morrison warned him that pneumonia often got worse before it got better, that the crisis point usually came around the 3rd or 4th day. Garrett barely left her side. He sent word to his ranch foreman that he would be staying in town for a while, and he took a room at the boarding house down the street so he could wash and change clothes. But most of his time was spent in that small room at the doctor's office, watching and waiting and praying to a God he was not entirely sure he believed in. He learned things about Fiona during those feverish days. He learned that she talked in her sleep about a sister named Catherine who had died of scarlet fever. He learned that she was afraid of the dark and that she cried for her mother. He learned that she was stubborn, fighting the illness even when it seemed to be winning, forcing down the bitter medicines Dr. Morrison prescribed, and struggling to breathe when every breath must have felt like knives in her lungs. On the morning of the 4th day, the fever broke. Garrett was dozing in his chair, exhausted after another sleepless night, when he heard her voice. "Mr. Norwood?" His eyes snapped open. Fiona was awake, truly awake, and looking at him with clear eyes. The flush of fever had faded from her cheeks, leaving her pale but no longer burning up. "You are awake." He stood up so quickly that his chair nearly tipped over backward. "How do you feel?" "Like I have been trampled by a horse," she admitted, her voice still weak but steady. "But better than I did. How long have I been ill?" 4 days. You gave us quite a scare." He poured a glass of water and brought it to her, helping her sit up enough to drink. Her hand shook as she held the glass, and he kept his own hand steady beneath hers. 4 days, she repeated, looking stunned. "I remember the stage and arriving here, and you catching me when I fell. After that, everything is just fragments, bad dreams mostly. You have been very sick. Pneumonia. But Dr. Morrison says the worst is past now, as long as you rest and follow his orders. Fiona nodded slowly, then looked around the small room. This is not what I imagined when I thought about arriving in Virginia City. No, I do not imagine it is. Garrett pulled his chair closer to the bed and sat down. I am sorry you had to go through this. It is hardly your fault that I got sick. She studied his face, and he found himself wondering what she saw. He knew he looked rough after 4 days with little sleep, his jaw dark with stubble and his clothes rumpled. You stayed with me. Where else would I be? You do not know me. We have never even met properly. You could have left me in the doctor's care and gone back to your ranch. I could have, Garrett agreed, but I did not want to. You came all this way to marry me, Fiona. That means something to me. Color rose in her pale cheeks and she looked away. I do not even know what you look like properly. Everything has been so foggy. Well, you can get a good look now. Garrett leaned back and spread his hands. What you see is what you get. I am 32 years old, 6 feet tall, and I make my living raising cattle. I am not rich, but I do well enough. I am not much for fancy talk or city manners, but I work hard, and I keep my promises. Fiona's gaze traveled over him, taking in his sun-weathered face and broad shoulders, the calloused hands and steady brown eyes. You have a kind face, she said finally. I think I remember that, even through the fever. You have kind eyes. It was Garrett's turn to feel color rise in his face. I try to be a decent man. The letters you wrote were kind, too. That is why I said yes when you asked me to come west and marry you. I could tell from your words that you were a good person. She paused, then added quietly, I hope I have not disappointed you too badly. I wanted to make a good first impression, and instead I arrived half dead and have been nothing but a burden. Stop that. Garrett's voice came out sharper than he intended, and he softened it with an effort. You are not a burden. You are a brave woman who had the misfortune to get sick on a long journey. There is no shame in that. Tears welled up in Fiona's eyes, and she blinked them back impatiently. I am not usually this weepy. I think the illness has made me weak. Crying does not make you weak. You have been through an ordeal. He reached out and took her hand, feeling how fragile it was in his larger one. But you are going to recover, and you are going to be fine. I am going to make sure of it. She smiled at him then, a real smile that lit up her whole face despite the pallor and the dark circles. Thank you, Garrett. May I call you Garrett? I would prefer it to Mr. Norwood. We are supposed to be getting married after all. Are we still? The question was tentative, uncertain. I would understand if you changed your mind. You agreed to marry a healthy woman who could help you on your ranch, not an invalid. You are not an invalid. You are recovering from pneumonia. There is a difference. Garrett squeezed her hand gently. And yes, we are still getting married, if that is what you want. But there is no rush. You need to get your strength back first. We have time to get to know each other properly. Relief flooded Fiona's face. I would like that. I was so afraid you would send me back to Boston. I am not sending you anywhere, except to a comfortable bed where you can rest and heal. Once the doctor says you are well enough to leave his office, you can stay at the boarding house where I have been keeping a room. Mrs. Chen, who runs it, is a good woman, very respectable. You will have your own room, and she will make sure you have everything you need. And you? I will be nearby. I need to get back to the ranch for a few hours each day to check on things. But I will visit you in town regularly. We can spend time together, talk, see if we suit each other in person the way we did in letters. Fiona nodded, looking relieved. That sounds perfect. Dr. Morrison came in then, pleased to see his patient awake and coherent. He examined Fiona thoroughly, pronounced her past the crisis point, and ordered her to stay in bed for at least another week. No getting up except to use the necessary, he said firmly. You need to let your lungs heal, and that means rest, complete rest. Mrs. Patterson will bring you broth and soft foods, and Mr. Norwood here can read to you if you get bored, but you are not to exert yourself. Is that clear? Yes, doctor, Fiona said meekly. After the doctor left, Garrett settled back into his chair. Can I get you anything? Are you hungry? Not really, but I suppose I should try to eat something. She looked thoughtful. You said you would read to me. Do you like to read? I do, though I do not get as much time for it as I would like. What about you? I love it. I worked in a dressmaker's shop back in Boston, and some of our wealthy clients would lend me books. I read everything I could get my hands on. Her eyes brightened with enthusiasm, making her look younger and more alive despite her weakness. What kinds of books do you like? History mostly, accounts of the Lewis and Clark expedition, that sort of thing. But I enjoy a good novel too. Have you read anything by Charles Dickens? Oh yes, Great Expectations is one of my favorites. They talked for another hour about books and reading, and Garrett found himself relaxing in a way he had not in days. This was the Fiona he had glimpsed in her letters, intelligent and curious and full of life. The illness had not taken that away from her. When she started to tire, he insisted she sleep, promising to be there when she woke up. And he was, settling into the chair with a book borrowed from the doctor's shelf, content to spend his time watching over her. The days that followed fell into a gentle rhythm. Fiona grew stronger slowly, able to stay awake for longer periods and to eat more solid food. Garrett visited every day, sometimes for hours at a time. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts and dreams for the future. He told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, about coming west after the war to make his fortune, about building his ranch from nothing. She told him about life in Boston, about losing her parents within a year of each other, about the loneliness that had driven her to answer his advertisement for a mail-order bride. I was not running away, she explained one afternoon, about a week after the fever had broken. She was sitting up in bed now, propped against pillows, wearing a borrowed nightgown from Mrs. Patterson. But I wasn't running toward anything either, if that makes sense. My life in Boston felt like it was just happening to me, like I had no control over it. When I saw your advertisement, something in me responded to it. The idea of starting fresh, of choosing my own path, that appealed to me. I understand that, Garrett said. He was sitting in his usual chair, turned to face her. That is part of why I came west too. I wanted to build something that was mine, something I had created with my own hands. And have you? Built what you wanted, I mean. I am getting there. The ranch is doing well. I have good grazing land and a reliable water source, and my herd has grown every year. But it has been lonely. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I am not a man who needs a lot of company, but I found myself wanting someone to share it all with, someone to talk to at the end of the day, someone who would care about the things that matter to me. That is why I put the advertisement in the paper. And you got dozens of responses from desperate women, Fiona said with a slight smile. Actually, I got 7 responses. I answered 3 of them, including yours. But you were the only one whose letters made me feel like I was talking to a real person, not just someone who wanted to escape to the West. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You told me about the books you read and the stray cat you fed and the way the Charles River looked in winter. You made me see your life, not just hear about it. That is what made me want to know you better. I felt the same way about your letters, Fiona admitted. You wrote about the mountains and your cattle and the silence of the desert at night. You made the West sound beautiful and wild and a little bit frightening. I wanted to see it for myself. You will. Once you are well enough, I will show you everything. The ranch, the mountains, the places where the sunset turns the whole sky orange and purple. I would like that. She reached out her hand, and he took it without hesitation. It had become natural between them, this casual touching. Her hand was warmer now, no longer burning with fever, and her grip was stronger. Fiona, he said carefully, I want you to know that there is no pressure about the marriage. I meant what I said before. We have time to get to know each other. If you decide that I am not what you want, or that life in Nevada is not for you, I will help you get settled somewhere else. You are not trapped. She looked at him for a long moment, her green eyes serious. Do you want to marry me, Garrett? Yes, he said simply. I wanted to marry the woman who wrote me those letters, and now that I have met you, I want it even more. But I want you to be sure. I am sure, she said quietly. I was sure before I left Boston, and I am sure now. You are a good man, Garrett Norwood. You have sat by my bedside for days, taken care of me when I was at my worst, and never once made me feel like I was a burden or a disappointment. How could I not want to marry you? His heart did something complicated in his chest, and he found himself grinning like a fool. Well then, I guess we are getting married. I guess we are, she agreed, smiling back at him. Dr. Morrison declared Fiona well enough to leave his care 2 days later, with strict instructions to continue resting and to avoid any strenuous activity for at least another month. Garrett carried her to the boarding house himself, despite her protests that she could walk. Doctor said no strenuous activity, he reminded her. Walking counts. I weigh less than a sack of grain. Carrying me is more strenuous than me walking. I have carried plenty of sacks of grain. You are much lighter and better company. Mrs. Chen, the boarding house proprietor, had prepared a room on the ground floor so Fiona would not have to manage stairs. It was small but clean, with a bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand, and a window that looked out onto the street. You need anything, you call for me, Mrs. Chen said firmly. She was a tiny woman with iron gray hair and a brisk manner that hid a warm heart. I bring you meals, make sure you rest. No working, no getting up, except to use necessary. Understand? Yes, madam, Fiona said meekly. And you, Mrs. Chen turned to Garrett, you make sure she behaves. This girl needs to heal, not push herself too hard. I will keep an eye on her, Garrett promised. Good. Now, both of you, out of my way. I have other guests to tend to. Once Mrs. Chen had bustled away, Garrett helped Fiona settle into the bed. She still looked frail, her dress hanging loose on her frame and her face too pale, but there was color in her cheeks and life in her eyes. I feel like I should be doing something, she said restlessly. I have been lying in bed for nearly 2 weeks. I'm going to lose my mind if I have to rest much longer. Would you like me to bring you some books, or maybe some sewing if you feel up to it? Her face brightened. Sewing would be wonderful. I am used to keeping my hands busy. Do you think there is a shop in town where I could get some fabric and thread? There is a general store that carries notions. I will stop by tomorrow and pick up whatever you need. Make me a list? Thank you. She bit her lip, then said, Garrett, I know you need to get back to your ranch. You have already spent so much time away because of me. I do need to spend a few days out there, he admitted. There are things that need my attention. But I will be back by the end of the week, and I will visit as often as I can. Will you be all right here? I will be fine. Mrs. Chen seems very capable, and I have a comfortable room. You do not need to worry about me. But he did worry, Garrett discovered over the next few days. He worried as he rode back to his ranch, worried as he threw himself into the work that had piled up in his absence, and worried as he lay in his own bed at night, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Fiona alone in that boarding house room. His foreman, a grizzled veteran named Pete Sullivan, noticed his distraction right away. You planning on telling me what has got you so twisted up? Pete asked on the second day, as they worked to repair a fence line. Or am I supposed to pretend I have not noticed you are about as useful as a 3-legged horse? I am working, Garrett protested. You are going through the motions. Your mind is somewhere else entirely. Pete hammered in a fence post with practiced efficiency. I am guessing it has something to do with that mail-order bride of yours. She has been sick. Pneumonia. She nearly died. Pete's expression sobered. But she is all right now. She is recovering, but she is still weak, and I left her in town while I came back here. Garrett drove his own post into the ground with more force than necessary. I keep thinking about what could happen if she has a relapse or if she needs help and there is no one there. Mrs. Chen runs a good boarding house. She will keep an eye on your girl. I know that, but it does not stop me from worrying. Pete was quiet for a moment, then said, You have got it bad for her, do not you? Garrett looked up, startled. What? You are in love with her, or well on your way to it anyhow. I have known you for 5 years, Garrett, and I have never seen you like this over a woman. I barely know her. We have only spent time together while she has been sick. Sometimes that is when you get to know someone best, when all the pretense is stripped away and all you have got is the truth. Pete picked up another post and moved down the fence line. My advice? Finish up whatever needs finishing here, then get yourself back to town. That girl needs you more than this ranch does right now. Garrett took his foreman's advice. He worked from dawn until well after dark for the next 3 days, making sure everything was in order. He checked on the cattle, met with the men he had hired to help with the fall roundup, and went over the books to make sure the ranch's finances were solid. Then he packed a bag, saddled his horse, and rode back to Virginia City. It was late afternoon when he arrived, the sun starting its descent toward the mountains. He stopped at the general store first to pick up the sewing supplies Fiona had requested, then headed to the boarding house. Mrs. Chen met him at the door with a knowing smile. She has been watching for you all day, claimed she was not, but I saw her looking out the window every time someone went past. Garrett felt warmth spread through his chest. How has she been? Restless, getting stronger every day. Dr. Morrison came by yesterday and said she is healing well, but she needs to keep resting. Mrs. Chen lowered her voice. She is lonely, I think. She tries to help around the house, but I keep telling her no. Maybe you can keep her company, keep her from going stir-crazy. That is exactly what I plan to do. Fiona was indeed looking out the window when Garrett tapped on her door. She turned at the sound, and her whole face lit up. "You are back," she said, and there was no hiding the pleasure in her voice. I brought your sewing things." He set the parcels on the small table by the window. "How are you feeling?" "Much better. I have been walking around the room a little each day, trying to build up my strength. Dr. Morrison says I'm doing well." She gestured to the chair. "Please, sit. Tell me about your ranch. I want to hear everything." So Garrett sat and told her about the work he had been doing, about the cattle and the land and the mountains that surrounded his property. Fiona listened with genuine interest, asking questions and making observations that showed she was really paying attention. "It sounds beautiful," she said when he finished. "I cannot wait to see it." "You will, as soon as the doctor says you are well enough for the journey. It is about 10 miles from town, maybe an hour and a half by wagon." He paused, then added, "I have been thinking about the wedding. When you are ready, we can have a small ceremony here in town. The church has a minister, or we can go to the justice of the peace if you would prefer." "The church would be nice," Fiona said. "I am not particularly religious, but it feels right to be married in a church. My parents were married in a church." "Then that is what we will do. When do you want to set the date? Give me another 2 weeks to get my strength back fully. Then we can marry." She smiled at him, a little shy suddenly. "Is that all right with you?" "That is more than all right." Garrett reached out and took her hand. "Fiona, I want you to know something. I know this has all happened quickly, and in a way neither of us expected. But I am glad you are here. Even with everything that has happened, I am glad." "So am I," she said softly. "I know it is strange, but I feel like I know you. Like we have known each other longer than a few weeks." "The letters," Garrett said. "We got to know each other through the letters." "Yes, but it is more than that. You have been so kind to me, so patient. You have shown me who you are through your actions, not just your words." She squeezed his hand. "I think we are going to be happy together, Garrett." "I think so too." Over the next 2 weeks, Garrett visited Fiona almost every day. Sometimes he brought her books from the small lending library in town. Sometimes they just sat and talked, sharing stories and learning about each other. And sometimes they simply enjoyed each other's company in comfortable silence. Fiona sewing, while Garrett read aloud to her. Slowly, Fiona's strength returned. Her face filled out a little, losing the gaunt look that illness had given her. Color came back to her cheeks, and her eyes grew brighter. She started taking short walks with Garrett, at first just around the boarding house, then gradually venturing farther into town. Virginia City was a bustling place, full of miners and merchants and people from all over the world who had come seeking their fortunes in the silver mines. Fiona watched it all with fascination, her eyes wide as she took in the saloons and gambling halls, the fine hotels and busy stores. "It is so different from Boston," she said one afternoon as they walked down C Street, the main thoroughfare. "Everything here feels newer, more alive somehow." "It is a young town," Garrett agreed. "Most of the buildings have only been here for 10 or 15 years. The big silver strike was in 1859, and people have been flooding in ever since." "Do you ever go into the mines?" "No, that is not the life for me. I prefer open sky and fresh air. But I know men who work underground, and it is hard, dangerous work. Some of them make good money, but others barely scrape by." He steered her around a group of rough-looking miners who had clearly been drinking. "The ranch is a better life, I think. Harder in some ways, but more honest." "I am looking forward to seeing it." Fiona's hand tightened on his arm. "To starting our life together there." They set the wedding date for October 21st, a clear, cool day with the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides. Fiona had sewn herself a new dress for the occasion, a simple but elegant design in deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. Garrett wore his best suit, brushed and pressed for the occasion. The ceremony was small, just the two of them, Dr. Morrison and his wife as witnesses, and Mrs. Chen, who had insisted on attending. The minister was a kind-faced man who kept the service short and sweet, understanding that this was a practical arrangement as much as a romantic one. But when Garrett looked into Fiona's eyes as they said their vows, he felt something shift in his chest. This was not just practical. This was real. This woman, who had traveled thousands of miles to marry him, who had fought her way back from the edge of death, who looked at him now with trust and hope and something that might become love. This woman was his wife. I, Garrett Nicholas Norwood, take you, Fiona Rose Vaughn, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he said, his voice steady and sure. I promise to honor you, to care for you, to stand by your side through whatever comes, for as long as we both shall live. I, Fiona Rose Vaughn, take you, Garrett Nicholas Norwood, to be my lawfully wedded husband, Fiona replied, her voice clear despite the tears shining in her eyes. I promise to honor you, to support you, to build a life with you in this wild country, for as long as we both shall live. The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Garrett kissed his bride for the first time. It was gentle, almost chaste, but it sent warmth flooding through him. When they pulled apart, Fiona was smiling. "Hello, husband," she said. "Hello, wife," he replied, and they both laughed. Mrs. Chen had prepared a small wedding supper at the boarding house, and they spent the evening celebrating with their few friends. Dr. Morrison gave a rambling toast about the importance of good health and good marriage. Mrs. Chen cried and pressed little packages of sweets into their hands. And through it all, Garrett found himself unable to stop looking at Fiona, marveling at the fact that she was his now. As the evening drew to a close, reality set in. They were married now, but where would they spend their wedding night? The boarding house rooms were small, and Mrs. Chen ran a respectable establishment. Garrett had been thinking about this problem for days. "I took a room at the hotel," he said quietly to Fiona as their guests began to leave. "The International Hotel on B Street. It is nothing fancy, but it is clean and private." Relief and nervousness warred in Fiona's expression. "All right, Fiona." He took both her hands in his. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for. I know this has all happened quickly, and you have just recovered from being very ill. We can take our time. We are married now," she said softly, "and I want to be your wife in truth, not just in name, but I will admit I am a little frightened. I do not know what to expect." "Neither do I, really. I have never been married before." Garrett gave her a lopsided smile. "I suppose we will figure it out together." The room at the International Hotel was indeed nothing fancy, but it was clean and comfortable, with a large bed and a window overlooking the street. Someone, probably Mrs. Chen, had left flowers in a vase on the dresser. They stood awkwardly in the middle of the room for a moment, suddenly shy with each other now that they were alone. Then Fiona laughed, a little breathless. "This is silly. We have spent hours together over the past few weeks, and now I feel like I do not know what to say to you." "I feel the same way." Garrett removed his jacket and hung it over the chair. "Would you like some help with your dress?" Fiona nodded, turning her back to him so he could reach the buttons. His fingers were clumsy at first, unused to such delicate work, but he managed to undo them one by one. He could feel her trembling slightly, though whether from nervousness or something else, he could not tell. When the dress was open, she stepped away and disappeared behind the screen in the corner to change. Garrett removed his boots and shirt, then hesitated. Should he get into bed? Wait for her? He settled for sitting on the edge of the mattress, feeling like an awkward boy instead of a grown man of 32. Fiona emerged a few minutes later, wearing a white nightgown, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She looked young and vulnerable and beautiful, and Garrett's breath caught in his throat. "You are lovely," he said quietly. Color rose in her cheeks. "Thank you." She crossed the room and sat down beside him on the bed. For a moment, they just looked at each other, and then Garrett reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "We really will take this slowly," he said. "I do not want to hurt you or frighten you." "I trust you," Fiona said simply, and leaned in to kiss him. This kiss was different from the one at the church, deeper and more searching. Garrett pulled her closer, feeling the warmth of her body through the thin nightgown, and she responded by wrapping her arms around his neck. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I think," Fiona said, her voice unsteady, "that we are going to be just fine." And they were. That night they came together with tenderness and care, learning each other's bodies and responses. There was some awkwardness, some laughter, when things did not go quite as expected, and a few moments of pain for Fiona that Garrett tried his best to minimize. But mostly there was warmth and connection, a sense of rightness that surprised them both. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, Fiona's head on Garrett's chest and his arm around her shoulders. "That was not what I expected," she said after a while. "Good unexpected or bad unexpected?" Garrett asked, though her tone suggested she was not displeased. "Good. Definitely good." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "I had heard it was something women had to endure, something unpleasant that was just part of marriage, but that was not unpleasant at all. I am glad." He ran his fingers through her hair, enjoying the silky feel of it. "I want you to be happy, Fiona, in all ways." "I am happy. Happier than I have been in a long time." She settled back against him with a contented sigh. "When do we leave for the ranch?" "Tomorrow, if you feel up to it. Or we can stay in town a few more days if you would prefer." "Tomorrow," she said decisively. "I want to see our home. I want to start our life together." They left Virginia City the next morning in a wagon loaded with Fiona's trunk and the few possessions Garrett had accumulated in town. The day was clear and bright, the air crisp with the promise of coming winter. Fiona sat beside Garrett on the wagon seat, wrapped in a warm shawl, her eyes bright with excitement. The road wound through high desert country, past sagebrush and scattered juniper trees. In the distance, the Sierra Nevada rose up, their peaks already dusted with snow. Fiona drank it all in, turning this way and that to see everything. "It is so open," she said. "So much space. In Boston, everything was crowded, buildings pressed up against each other, people everywhere. Here it feels like you can breathe." "That is what I love about it," Garrett agreed. "There is room here to be yourself, to build something. You are not hemmed in by what came before." The ranch appeared as they crested a low hill. It was not much to look at, Garrett knew. A small house built of wood and stone, a barn, a few outbuildings, and corrals for the horses and cattle. But it was his, every inch of it, and he was proud of what he had built. Fiona was quiet for a moment, taking it in. Then she smiled. "It is perfect." "It is small," Garrett warned as he helped her down from the wagon. "Only 3 rooms, and fairly rough. I built it myself, and I am a better rancher than I am a carpenter." "It is still perfect," Fiona insisted. "Show me everything." The house consisted of a main room that served as kitchen and living area, a small bedroom, and an even smaller storage room. The furniture was basic, built by Garrett or purchased second-hand in town, but it was clean and sturdy, and the pot-bellied stove threw off good heat. "I know it is not what you are used to," Garrett said, watching Fiona's face anxiously. "But we can add on to it over time. When we have children, we will need more space anyway." "Children?" Fiona turned to look at him, something soft in her expression. "You want children?" "Do you not?" "I do. I very much do. I just did not know if you had thought that far ahead." "I have thought about it," Garrett admitted. "Not in detail, maybe, but the idea of a family, of children running around this place, that is part of what I want to build here." Fiona crossed the room and took his hands. "Then we will build it together, all of it. The ranch, the family, the life, together." "Together," Garrett echoed and kissed her. The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Fiona had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, so different from the city routine she had known. She rose before dawn to cook breakfast for Garrett and the ranch hands, learned to churn butter and preserve food for the coming winter, and gradually took over the management of the household. Garrett, for his part, had to learn to share his space and his life. He had been alone for so long that having someone else in the house felt strange at first, but it was a good kind of strange. He liked coming in from a long day of work to find Fiona there, liked sitting across from her at the table and telling her about his day, liked falling asleep with her curled against him. They learned each other's habits and quirks. Garrett discovered that Fiona sang when she worked, old songs from her childhood, mixed with popular tunes from the music halls. Fiona learned that Garrett was grumpy before he had his morning coffee, and that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard sometimes. Pete Sullivan and the other ranch hands took to Fiona immediately. She treated them with respect and made sure they had good food and clean clothes, and in return, they looked out for her and helped her adjust to life on the ranch. "You got yourself a good woman there, boss," Pete said one evening, as he and Garrett were checking on the cattle. "She is smart and she works hard, not afraid to get her hands dirty either." "I know I am lucky," Garrett said, and he did know it. Every day he felt grateful that Fiona had answered his advertisement, that she had been brave enough to come west, that she had survived her illness and stayed to build a life with him. Winter came to Nevada, bringing snow to the mountains and cold winds to the high desert. The ranch work slowed down during the cold months, giving Garrett more time to spend with Fiona. They passed the long evenings by the fire, reading or talking, or simply enjoying each other's company. "Tell me more about your childhood," Fiona said one night, curled up beside him on the sofa he had built. "You have told me about coming west, but not much about before that." Garrett thought about it, sorting through memories. "There is not much to tell, really. I grew up on a small farm in Missouri, nothing grand. My father was a good man, but not much of a farmer. We always had just enough, never more. When the war came, I enlisted. I was 18 and thought it would be an adventure. Was it? No, it was mostly boredom broken up by moments of terror. I saw things I wish I had not, did things I am not proud of. But I survived, which is more than a lot of men can say." He was quiet for a moment. "After the war, I could not go back to that farm. Too many memories, too many ghosts, so I came west looking for something new." Fiona reached up and touched his face gently. "I am glad you did, otherwise we never would have met. What about you? What was your life like before you came here?" "Ordinary, mostly. My father was a clerk, my mother took in sewing. We were not poor, but we were not wealthy either. Comfortable, I suppose you would say." Her voice grew sad. "When Catherine died, it broke something in my parents. My mother got sick a year later and never recovered. My father followed 6 months after that. I think he died of grief as much as anything else. And you were left alone." "Yes, I had some friends, and I had my work at the dressmaker's shop. But I was so lonely, Garrett. I felt like I was just going through the motions of living, not really living at all. That is why your advertisement caught my attention. It offered a chance to really live again, to be part of something. Are you glad you took that chance?" Fiona turned in his arms to look up at him. "Every day, even when it is hard, even when I miss Boston or feel overwhelmed by how different everything is here, I am glad, because I have you, and I have this life we are building, and that is worth everything." Garrett kissed her then, pouring all his feelings into it. He was not good with words the way she was, but he could show her how he felt, and she responded with equal passion, her hands tangling in his hair, her body pressing against his. They made love there on the sofa, urgent and sweet, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. And afterward, as they lay tangled together under a blanket, Garrett thought that he had never been happier in his entire life. Spring came, and with it came new challenges and new joys. The cattle had made it through the winter in good shape, and several of the cows dropped calves. Garrett taught Fiona to ride, and she took to it eagerly, loving the freedom of being able to explore the ranch on horseback. "I feel like a different person out here," she said one afternoon as they rode together through the sagebrush. "Like the Fiona from Boston was a pale shadow of who I really am." "Maybe you are just becoming who you were always meant to be," Garrett suggested. "Maybe." She smiled at him, her face glowing with health and happiness. The last traces of her illness had long since faded, and she had filled out, no longer thin and frail. "All I know is that I love it here. I love this life. I love you." It was the first time either of them had said those words out loud. They had shown their love in 100 small ways, but neither had put it into words. Now, with the admission hanging in the air between them, Garrett felt his heart swell. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone." They stopped their horses and kissed, there in the middle of nowhere, with the mountains rising around them and the sky stretching overhead, impossibly blue. In May, Fiona told Garrett that she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had waited to be sure before saying anything. Now, as they sat together at the kitchen table after supper, she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is a baby in there," she said softly. "Our baby. Due sometime in January, I think." Garrett stared at her, his mind struggling to process this information. A baby. He was going to be a father. They were going to be parents. "Are you sure?" he asked finally. As sure as I can be. I have missed 2 courses now, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. Mrs. Chen told me those are the signs. Fiona's expression grew uncertain. Are you pleased? I know we have only been married for 7 months. Maybe it is too soon. Too soon? Garrett found his voice. Fiona, I am more than pleased. I am overjoyed. We are going to have a baby. He stood up and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop before she got dizzy. I am so glad you are happy, she said when he set her down. I was worried you might think it was too fast, that we were not ready. We might not be ready, but we will figure it out. We always do. Garrett kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. A baby. Our baby. This is the best news I have had in my entire life. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Fiona was sick in the mornings for the first few months, but after that, she felt well. Her belly grew round, and Garrett found himself constantly amazed by the changes in her body. He would lie with his hand on her stomach at night, feeling the baby move and kick. Strong, he would say. This one is going to be strong. He or she gets that from you, Fiona would reply with a smile. They prepared for the baby's arrival throughout the summer and fall. Garrett built a cradle, taking great care with every joint and surface. Fiona sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her needle flying as she worked. They talked endlessly about names and argued good-naturedly about whether the baby would have Garrett's brown eyes or Fiona's green ones. I hope he has your kindness, Fiona said one evening as they sat together watching the sunset. And I hope she has your strength, Garrett replied. We do not even know if it is a he or a she yet. Does it matter? We will love the baby either way. No, it does not matter at all. Fiona leaned against him contentedly. I am so happy, Garrett. Sometimes I am almost afraid of how happy I am. Do not be afraid. We have earned this happiness. He wrapped his arm around her, careful of her swollen belly. We have been through hard times already. We have earned the right to enjoy the good times. In December, as Fiona's due date approached, Garrett became increasingly nervous. He had helped deliver calves and foals, but the thought of Fiona going through childbirth terrified him. What if something went wrong? What if he lost her? Fiona, sensing his worry, tried to reassure him. Women have babies all the time. I am healthy and strong. Everything is going to be fine. But what if it is not? Then we will deal with it. But there is no point in worrying about things that probably will not happen. She took his hand and placed it on her belly, where the baby was kicking vigorously. Feel that? That is a strong, healthy baby, and I am a strong, healthy woman. We are going to be fine. When Fiona's labor started on a cold January night, Garrett sent one of the ranch hands racing to town to fetch Dr. Morrison. But the doctor arrived too late. The baby was in a hurry to be born, and by the time the doctor's wagon pulled up to the ranch house, Fiona had already delivered with only Garrett and Mrs. Sullivan, Pete's wife, to help her. It was a boy, red-faced and howling, with a thick head of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn brown. Garrett held his son for the first time with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the tiny, perfect life they had created. He is beautiful, he said, his voice choked with emotion. He is perfect, Fiona agreed. She looked exhausted but radiant, her hair damp with sweat and her face glowing. Our son, what should we name him? They had discussed names for months but had never settled on one. Now, looking down at the baby in his arms, Garrett knew. Jacob, he said. Jacob Thomas Norwood. Tom was my father's name. Jacob Thomas, Fiona repeated, trying it out. I like it. Jacob Thomas Norwood. Welcome to the world, little one. Dr. Morrison arrived 10 minutes later, out of breath and apologetic. He examined both mother and baby, pronounced them healthy, and scolded Garrett for not sending for him sooner. First babies usually take hours, the doctor grumbled. I thought I had plenty of time. So did I, Garrett said. But Jacob had other ideas. Life with a baby was harder than either of them had anticipated. Jacob was a good baby, healthy and alert, but he woke every few hours to nurse, and the constant lack of sleep wore on both of them. Fiona, who had always been energetic, found herself exhausted. Garrett tried to help as much as he could, walking the floor with Jacob when he was fussy, changing diapers, and taking over some of Fiona's household tasks. I feel like all I do is feed him, Fiona said one afternoon, close to tears with fatigue. I love him so much, but I am so tired. I know. Garrett took the baby from her. You need to rest. Go lie down for a while. I will take care of him. But you have work to do. The work can wait. You are more important. He kissed her forehead. Go. Sleep. That is an order from your husband. Fiona managed a weak smile. Yes, sir. As winter turned to spring and spring to summer, things got easier. Jacob started sleeping for longer stretches at night, and Fiona's energy returned. She found ways to manage the household tasks with a baby on her hip or playing on a blanket nearby, and Garrett discovered that fatherhood suited him. He loved teaching Jacob new things, loved watching his son discover the world. By the time Jacob was 6 months old, he was a chubby, happy baby who smiled at everyone and everything. Pete Sullivan swore the boy would grow up to be a heartbreaker, and Mrs. Chen brought him gifts every time she visited from town. He is going to be spoiled, Fiona said, but she was smiling as she said it. A little spoiling never hurt anyone, Garrett replied, bouncing his son on his knee and making him giggle. They settled into a rhythm, their family of 3. The ranch continued to prosper, and Garrett began to talk about expanding, buying more land and increasing the herd. Fiona started a garden, growing vegetables and herbs, and she traded her excess produce in town for things they needed. On their second wedding anniversary, Garrett took Fiona on a picnic, just the two of them. Mrs. Sullivan agreed to watch Jacob for the afternoon, and they rode out to a spot Garrett had found, a little meadow with a stream running through it and aspens turning gold overhead. This is beautiful, Fiona said, spreading out the blanket. I have never been here before. I wanted to show it to you. I have been thinking about building a house here someday, when we have more children and need more space. Garrett sat down beside her. What do you think? I think it is perfect. A house here would be wonderful. She leaned against him. How many children are you planning on having? I do not know. As many as you want, I suppose. I like being a father. I would not mind doing it a few more times. Good, because I have something to tell you. Fiona took his hand and placed it on her stomach, still flat, but not for much longer. We are going to have another baby, due in April, I think. Garrett felt the now familiar rush of joy and excitement. Another baby. Jacob is going to be a big brother. He is. I hope he's ready for it. Fiona smiled up at him. Are you happy? Always. You make me happy every single day. Fiona, you and Jacob and now this new baby. You have given me everything I ever wanted and things I did not even know to want. You have done the same for me. When I got off that stage 2 years ago, I was so sick I could barely stand. I thought I might die. And you saved me, Garrett. You nursed me back to health and gave me a reason to fight. You gave me love and a home and a family. How could I not be happy? They kissed there in the golden autumn light, surrounded by the beauty of the land they were building their life on. And Garrett thought, not for the first time, how lucky he was. He had taken a chance on a mail-order bride, and she had turned out to be the best thing that had ever happened to him. Their second child, a daughter, was born the following April on a warm spring day when the wildflowers were blooming across the desert. The birth was easier than Jacob's had been, and Fiona handled it with the calm confidence of a woman who had done this before. Another Norwood, Dr. Morrison said, handing the baby to her father. And a healthy one, too. Congratulations. Garrett looked down at his daughter, so small and perfect, and felt his heart expand. Hello, little one. I am your father. The baby opened her eyes, and he saw with delight that they were the same green as Fiona's. She had a tuft of dark hair like her brother, but her features were delicate, feminine. She is beautiful, he said to Fiona, just like her mother. What should we name her? Fiona asked, holding out her arms for the baby. I was thinking maybe Rose, after your middle name. Rose Elizabeth, if you like the sound of it. Rose Elizabeth Norwood. Fiona smiled down at their daughter. It is perfect. Welcome, Rose. Your brother is going to love you. Jacob, who was 15 months old now and toddling around with determination, was indeed fascinated by his baby sister. He would sit beside Fiona when she nursed Rose, patting the baby gently and making cooing sounds. He is going to be a good big brother, Fiona observed one afternoon, watching Jacob try to share his wooden horse with Rose, who was far too young to appreciate it. Just like his father is a good father, Garrett said, coming in from outside. He was dusty and tired from a day of working with the cattle, but he took the time to greet each member of his family properly, kissing Fiona and ruffling Jacob's hair and peering down at Rose in her cradle. "How did I get so lucky?" he wondered aloud. "We both got lucky," Fiona corrected. "We found each other despite all the odds, and we built this life together." As the years passed, the Norwood family continued to grow and thrive. Garrett expanded the ranch, buying adjacent land and increasing his herd until he was one of the most successful ranchers in the area. Fiona became known in Virginia City as a woman of taste and skill, and she started taking on sewing commissions from the wealthier families in town. Jacob grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and followed his father everywhere. Rose was bright and curious, always asking questions and exploring. 2 years after Rose's birth, Fiona gave birth to another son, Henry, and 3 years after that, a second daughter named Margaret. The little house that Garrett had built was no longer big enough, so he constructed the larger home he had dreamed of, the one in the meadow with the aspens and the stream. It had 6 rooms, enough space for their growing family, and Fiona filled it with warmth and love. "Sometimes I cannot believe this is my life," she said one evening, as she and Garrett sat on the porch of the new house, watching their children play in the fading light. Jacob was teaching Rose to ride a pony, while Henry and Margaret chased each other through the grass. "What do you mean?" Garrett asked, reaching over to take her hand. "I mean all of this. The ranch, the children, you. When I was in Boston, working at that dressmaker's shop, I never imagined I could have something like this. I thought I would spend my whole life alone, making dresses for other women to wear to parties I would never attend. And then I saw your advertisement, and I took a chance. And look what happened." "You almost died," Garrett reminded her, though he was smiling. "Yes, I did. But you saved me. You carried me when I was too sick to stand, and you nursed me back to health, and you loved me when I had nothing to offer but myself. You gave me everything, Garrett." "We gave each other everything," he corrected. "I was lonely before you came. The ranch was successful, but it was empty. You filled it with life and love. You gave me a family, a reason to work hard and build something lasting. I am the one who should be grateful." "Then we are both grateful," Fiona said softly. "And both lucky." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Inside the house, supper was waiting. In the barn, the horses and cattle were settled for the night. And around them, their children played and laughed, secure in the love of their parents and the life that had been built for them. It was not the life either Garrett or Fiona had expected when they started exchanging letters all those years ago. It was better. It was real and hard and beautiful, full of challenges and triumphs, sorrows and joys. It was the life they had chosen, and the life they had built together, one day at a time. "Come on," Garrett said finally, standing and pulling Fiona to her feet. "Let us get these children fed and into bed. It has been a long day." "Every day is long with 4 children," Fiona said, but she was smiling. "And every day is wonderful." They called the children in, and the family went inside together, the door closing behind them on another day in their life on the ranch. Outside, the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and a cool breeze blew down from the mountains, carrying with it the promise of another tomorrow. Years continued to roll by, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of the Norwood children. Jacob, at 16, was already as tall as his father and working the ranch like a full partner. He had his father's steady nature and his mother's keen intelligence, and Garrett knew the ranch would be in good hands when the time came to pass it on. Rose, at 14, was a beauty with her mother's green eyes and a spirit as wild as the desert wind. She could outride most of the ranch hands and had firm opinions about everything. Fiona worried sometimes that Rose was too independent, too unwilling to conform to what society expected of young women. But Garrett just laughed. "She is your daughter," he would say. "You came all the way from Boston to marry a man you had never met. You survived pneumonia through sheer stubbornness. She gets that independence from you." Henry, at 12, was the dreamer of the family. He loved books and learning and talked about becoming a teacher or maybe a lawyer. Garrett supported these ambitions, even though it meant Henry would probably leave the ranch someday. "Every child has to find their own path," he told Fiona when she worried about it. "We cannot keep them here if their hearts are somewhere else." And Margaret, the baby at 9, was a perfect blend of her parents. She had her father's calm patience and her mother's creative talent. and she spent hours helping Fiona with sewing or drawing pictures of the ranch and the mountains. On a warm summer evening in 1887, the Norwood family gathered for supper, as they did every night. It was a noisy, chaotic affair, with the children talking over each other and telling stories from their day. Garrett sat at the head of the table, Fiona at the other end, and they exchanged amused glances as their children argued about everything from the best way to break a horse to whether or not ghosts were real. After supper, after the dishes were washed and the children were sent to do their evening chores, Garrett and Fiona took their usual walk around the property. It had become their habit over the years, this quiet time together at the end of the day. "Jacob wants to go to the Territorial Fair in Carson City next month," Fiona said as they walked. "He wants to enter some of our cattle in the competition." "I know. He asked me about it this morning. I think it is a good idea. Let him show off what he has learned, represent the ranch. He is growing up so fast. They all are." There was a hint of sadness in Fiona's voice. "Soon they will be grown and starting their own lives, and it will just be the two of us again." Garrett put his arm around her waist. "Is that such a bad thing? I love our children, but I am rather fond of you too. It might be nice to have you to myself again." Fiona laughed. "I suppose you are right. And we will have grandchildren eventually. The house will not be empty for long." "Grandchildren," Garrett repeated, trying the word out. "That makes me feel old." "You are not old. You are distinguished." Fiona reached up and touched the gray that was starting to show at his temples. "And handsome? You have aged very well, Mr. Norwood. And you are as beautiful as the day I first saw you, Mrs. Norwood, even more so, actually. You were half dead with fever that day." "Thank you for that reminder," Fiona said dryly, but she was smiling. "That was not my finest hour." "Maybe not, but you fought your way back. You have always been a fighter, Fiona. That is one of the things I love most about you." They stopped walking and stood together, looking out at the ranch they had built. The house, larger and more solid than the original cabin, stood proud against the darkening sky. The barn and outbuildings were well maintained, the corrals full of healthy animals. Fields of hay waved in the breeze, and in the distance the mountains rose up, eternal and unchanging. "We did well, did not we?" Fiona said softly. "We took a chance on each other, and we built something real and lasting. We did better than well. We built a life, a family, a legacy." Garrett turned her to face him. "I do not say this often enough, but I love you, Fiona, more now than I did on the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." Tears shimmered in Fiona's eyes, but she was smiling. "I love you too. You saved my life in more ways than one, Garrett Norwood. You gave me a reason to live, a purpose, a home. You gave me love. I could never thank you enough for that. You thank me every day just by being here, by being you." He kissed her, gentle and sweet, a kiss that held all the years they had shared and all the years yet to come. When they finally pulled apart, the stars were out in full force, scattered across the vast Nevada sky like diamonds on black velvet. Somewhere in the house, one of their children was laughing. In the barn, a horse whinnied softly. The night was alive with the sounds of their life, their family, their home. "We should go in," Fiona said reluctantly. "Margaret will need help with her lessons, and I need to finish mending Jacob's shirt." "In a minute." Garrett kept his arm around her, unwilling to let the moment end. "Let us just stand here for a minute more." So they stood together in the gathering darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life out of letters and hope and love. They had faced challenges and overcome them. They had raised children and built a home. They had loved each other through sickness and health, through hard times and good times, through all the years that had passed since that September day when a mail-order bride arrived too sick to stand and a cowboy carried her and nursed her well. And they would continue to love each other, Garrett thought, for all the years yet to come, until they were old and gray, until their children had children of their own, until the end of their days. Because that was what real love was, not the romantic passion of youth, though they still had plenty of that, but the deep abiding commitment to stand by each other no matter what, to choose each other every day, to build a life together one moment at a time. "All right," Garrett said finally, "let us go in." Hand in hand, they walked back to the house, back to their children and their life. The door opened to warmth and light, to the sound of young voices and the smell of home. And as they stepped inside, Garrett looked at Fiona and saw his whole world reflected in her green eyes. This was what he had hoped for when he placed that advertisement in the paper all those years ago. Not just a wife, not just someone to share the work and the loneliness, but a partner, a friend, a lover, a mother to his children, someone to build a life with, to grow old with, to love with everything he had. And in Fiona, he had found all of that and more. The years continued their steady march forward, bringing with them both joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. But through it all, Garrett and Fiona faced everything together, their love growing stronger with each passing season. Jacob married a girl from Virginia City, a rancher's daughter named Sarah, and brought her home to the ranch. They built their own house on a piece of land Garrett gave them, and before long, they presented Garrett and Fiona with their first grandchild, a boy they named Garrett Thomas after his grandfather. Rose surprised everyone by falling in love with a school teacher from back east who came to Virginia City looking for adventure. She married him in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch, and they settled in town where he taught and she opened a dress shop, putting to use all the skills her mother had taught her. Henry did indeed become a lawyer, going to San Francisco to study and eventually setting up practice there. He came home to visit regularly, bringing stories of the big city and the cases he was working on. Garrett was proud of his son, even though he missed having him on the ranch. And Margaret, their youngest, fell in love with a neighboring rancher's son. They married when she was 20 in 1898 and settled on his family's ranch 20 miles away. Close enough to visit often, far enough to have their own life. All of our children, married and settled, Fiona said one evening, as she and Garrett sat on their porch watching the sun set. It was a ritual they had maintained for decades now, this quiet time together at the end of the day. When do we get so old? Speak for yourself, Garrett protested. He was 55 now, his hair more gray than brown, but he was still strong and healthy. I am in my prime. Of course you are, dear. Fiona patted his hand indulgently. She was 48. And while she claimed to feel every one of those years, Garrett thought she was as beautiful as ever. Her hair had silver threads running through the dark now, and there were lines around her eyes and mouth. But to him, she would always be the woman who had stepped off that stage all those years ago, brave and determined and strong. Do you ever regret it? He asked suddenly. Coming west, marrying me, all of this? Fiona turned to look at him, surprise and something like hurt in her eyes. How can you even ask that? After all these years, after everything we have built together, how can you wonder if I have regrets? I just want to make sure you have been happy, that this life has been what you wanted. Garrett Norwood, you listen to me. Fiona took both of his hands in hers. I have never regretted one single moment of my life with you. Not when I was sick with pneumonia and thought I might die. Not during the hard winters or the dry summers. Not when money was tight or when the children were difficult. Not ever. You have given me the most amazing life, full of love and purpose and joy. How could I possibly regret any of it? I just needed to hear you say it, Garrett admitted, to know for sure. Then hear it now. And believe it, I love you. I have loved you since you carried me into that doctor's office and refused to leave my side. I loved you when we stood in that church and promised to honor each other. I loved you when each of our children was born, when we built this house, when we weathered every storm together. And I will love you until the day I die and beyond, if such things are possible. Garrett felt his throat tighten with emotion. I love you too, more than I can say. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Fiona. They sat together in silence for a while, holding hands and watching the sky turn from gold to purple to deep blue. Stars began to appear, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The ranch was quieter now with the children gone, but it was still alive, still theirs. Do you know what tomorrow is? Fiona asked after a while. Garrett thought about it. September 23rd. Do you know what happened on September 23rd? That is the day you arrived, the day the stage brought you to Virginia City. 23 years ago tomorrow, I stepped off that stage, sick and scared and half dead. And you caught me. Fiona leaned her head on his shoulder. You have been catching me ever since. And you have been catching me right back, Garrett said, wrapping his arm around her. We catch each other. That is what love is. The next day, Garrett surprised Fiona by taking her back to Virginia City, back to the very spot where the stagecoach had stopped all those years ago. The town had grown and changed, but the boardwalk was still there, and the general store. "Why are we here?" Fiona asked, looking around curiously. "Because this is where our story began. I wanted to stand here with you 23 years later and remember that day. Remember how lucky we got." Garrett took her hand. "We took a chance on each other, Fiona. We trusted each other sight unseen. And it worked. Against all odds, it worked." "It worked because we made it work," Fiona said. "Because we chose each other every day, not just that first day. Because when things were hard, we did not give up. We fought for this, Garrett, for us, for our family, for our life together." "You are right." Garrett pulled her close, right there on the boardwalk with people passing by and giving them curious looks. "And I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. All of it." "So would I," Fiona whispered and kissed him. They spent the rest of the day in town, visiting old friends and remembering the early days of their marriage. Dr. Morrison had passed away years ago, but his son had taken over the practice, and they stopped by to say hello. Mrs. Chen was still running her boarding house, though she was ancient now and moved slowly. She cried when she saw them, remembering the sick young bride and the worried cowboy. "I knew you would make it," she said, patting Fiona's hand with her gnarled one. "I knew you two were meant to be together. I have always had a sense for these things." As they drove back to the ranch that evening, Fiona was quiet, lost in thought. Garrett glanced over at her, concerned. "What are you thinking about?" "About how different my life could have been. If I had not seen your advertisement, if I had not been brave enough to answer it, if I had died from the pneumonia, so many things could have gone differently. But they did not. You did answer, you were brave, and you survived. And here we are." "Here we are," Fiona echoed, "with 4 grown children, 8 grandchildren and counting, and a life full of memories. It is more than I ever dreamed of, Garrett. It is more than I dreamed of, too. And the best part is, we are not done yet. We still have years ahead of us, more memories to make, more grandchildren to spoil, more sunsets to watch together." "Promise me something," Fiona said suddenly. "Anything. Promise me that when our time comes, we will go together. I do not want to face life without you, Garrett. I do not think I could bear it." Garrett's hands tightened on the reins. "We cannot control that, Fiona. None of us knows when our time will come. I know, but promise me anyway. Promise me that whether it is tomorrow or 30 years from now, we will face it together, the way we have faced everything else." "I promise," Garrett said, even though he knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. "For as long as I have breath in my body, I will be by your side, and if the day comes when one of us has to go on alone, we will carry the other in our hearts until we meet again." Satisfied, Fiona settled back against the seat, her hand finding his. They rode the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, the wagon wheels creaking and the horses' hooves clip-clopping steadily. Above them, the stars were coming out, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, the birth of their children, all the moments of their life together. When they arrived home, the house was dark and quiet, waiting for them. Garrett helped Fiona down from the wagon, then stood for a moment, looking at the home they had built together. "Do you remember the first house?" he asked. "That little 3-room cabin I built when I first started the ranch?" "Of course I remember. It was drafty and the roof leaked, but it was ours." Fiona smiled at the memory. "I was so proud of that little house. It represented everything we were building together. And now look at us, a big house, successful ranch, a family that stretches from here to San Francisco." "We did good, Cowboy," Fiona said, using the endearment she had given him so many years ago. "We did real good." "We are not done yet," Garrett reminded her. "There is still more to do, more to build, more to love." "Then let us get started on tomorrow," Fiona said, taking his hand and leading him toward the house. "After all, we have a lot of tomorrows left to enjoy." And they did. Years more of tomorrows, filled with the ordinary and the extraordinary, the mundane and the magical. They watched their grandchildren grow and welcomed great-grandchildren. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, weathered losses and celebrated victories. They grew old together, their bodies aging, but their love remaining strong. On a spring morning in 1912, Garrett and Fiona celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary. They were both in their 70s now, moving more slowly but still active, still engaged with life and the ranch and their sprawling family. 37 years, Fiona marveled as they sat on their porch, a tradition they had never abandoned despite their age. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that we got married, and sometimes it feels like we have been together forever. Both are true, I think, Garrett said. His hair was white now, and his face was weathered by decades of sun and wind, but his eyes were still the same warm brown that Fiona had fallen in love with. Time is funny that way. Their children had organized a party at the ranch, and by afternoon, the house and yard were full of family. Jacob and Sarah were there with their 4 children, all grown now with families of their own. Rose and her husband came from Virginia City with their 3 daughters. Henry made the trip from San Francisco with his wife and 2 sons, and Margaret arrived from her ranch with her husband and their 5 children. "Look at all of this," Fiona said to Garrett as they surveyed their family. "All of these people, here because of us. Because we took a chance on each other." "It is humbling," Garrett agreed, "and wonderful." The party was loud and joyful, full of laughter and stories and love. The grandchildren pestered Garrett and Fiona to tell the story of how they met, and Garrett obliged, making Fiona blush as he described carrying her from the stagecoach. "I must have looked terrible," she protested. "You looked like you needed help, and I was there to give it," Garrett said simply. "Best decision I ever made." As evening approached and their family began to depart, heading back to their own homes and lives, Garrett and Fiona found themselves alone again on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Tired?" Garrett asked. "Exhausted," Fiona admitted, "but happy. So very happy." "Me too." Garrett reached over and took her hand, marveling at how familiar it felt, this hand he had held for 37 years. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think we should do this for at least another 37 years. Fiona laughed, the sound still bright and musical despite her age. "I am not sure we are going to live that long, my dear. That would make us well over 100. So, we have beaten the odds before. Why not do it again?" "Why not indeed?" Fiona squeezed his hand. "If anyone could live to be 100 out of sheer stubbornness, it would be us." They sat together as the sky darkened and the stars emerged, neither one wanting to move, to break the spell of the moment. This was their life, Garrett thought. Not the grand moments, not the big events, but these quiet times together, holding hands and watching the world turn. This was what they had built, what they had fought for, what they had chosen every day for 37 years. And if he had it all to do over again, he would not change a single thing. Well, maybe he would have made sure to send for Dr. Morrison earlier when Fiona was sick. But other than that, not a single thing. "What are you thinking about?" Fiona asked, the way she always did. "About how much I love you," Garrett said. "About how grateful I am that you answered my advertisement, that you had the courage to come west, that you survived that pneumonia and stayed to build a life with me. About how every good thing in my life traces back to you." "Oh, Garrett," Fiona's voice was thick with emotion. "You are going to make me cry." "Cry if you want to. We have earned the right to be sentimental in our old age. We certainly have." She leaned her head on his shoulder, the way she had done thousands of times before. "I love you, Garrett Norwood. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Fiona Norwood, forever and always." They sat together as the night deepened around them. 2 people who had found each other across distance and circumstance, who had loved each other through sickness and health, through all the years that had passed and all the years yet to come. The mail-order bride who had arrived too sick to stand, and the cowboy who had carried her and nursed her well and loved her for the rest of their days. Their story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic declarations, though there had been plenty of both over the years. It was a story of small moments and daily choices, of showing up for each other again and again, of building a life together one day at a time. It was a story of real love, the kind that lasts not because it is easy, but because it is worth fighting for. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the desert wind whispered through the sage, Garrett and Fiona sat together on their porch, holding hands in the darkness, grateful for every moment they had shared and looking forward to all the moments yet to come. Their love story, begun on a dusty street in Virginia City so many years ago, would continue until the end of their days and live on in the hearts of all the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren they had brought into the world. It was, they both agreed, the best story either of them had ever been part of, and they would not have traded it for anything in the world.